Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Third Thursday with the Allentown Art Museum. My name is Abby, and I'm going to be your host tonight. And we are very excited for our first ever Artist in Process program. Our artist tonight is Jackie Mallon, and I'll introduce her shortly. But before I do that, I want to give you all a little bit of information about the exhibition, which is now on view, that inspired tonight's program. So, give me one sec here. Okay. So sorry. Experiencing some technical difficulties, of course. New Century, New Woman is an exhibition now on view, and it will be on view through April 18th, 2021. This exhibition features, oh, here we go, features articles of clothing and textile from the early 19th century. And here are a few images from the show. And a wonderful quote: "Modern women do not spend their days settled in the comfort of an armchair." So it's really celebrating fashion and the suffragette movement of the early 19th century. It explores women's new personal and political freedoms at the turn of the 20th century, and it's through the lens of fashion. Between 1890 and 1920, many women challenged the expectation that their role should be limited to home and family. This new woman pursued employment and college education in increasing numbers and campaigned for suffrage and social reform. Fashionable clothing in this era ranged from elaborate feminine dresses to smart separates inspired by menswear. As women challenged norms of feminine behavior, many chose to dress stylishly in order to subvert stereotypes and advance their agendas. Honoring the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage in 2020, this exhibition offers a historical perspective on issues such as gender roles, fashion, and professional self-presentation that continue to resonate today. So that's a little bit of information about the exhibition. And now I would like to introduce our artist for tonight. Again, her name is Jackie Mallon. Jackie is originally from Northern Ireland. Jackie Mallon is a former fashion designer who received her master's at London Central St. Martin's before spending a decade designing for labels such as Giorgio Armani and Moschino in Milan, Italy. But it was her experience in New York City industry that inspired her to embrace the multi-hyphenate. While freelancing for Anthropology, she wrote a fashion novel, Silk for the Feed Dogs. The novel gained the attention of Amsterdam-based FashionUnited.com, which hired her as its US editor, where she has since been covering topics such as sustainability, diversity, education, and the future of fashion. Her second novel is due out this year. Malone also teaches the university-level fashion design and illustration, whether in classroom or remote, from her base in downtown Manhattan. Currently, she is working on her first nonfiction work, which brings together her two playgrounds of inspiration, art and literature. She would like to see more storytelling where illustrative art and the written word are combined, as was common in classic literature such as Dickens or Lewis Carroll. You can find her, her social media at Instagram, which is Jackie_Malone1, and Malone has 2 L's. And you can also check out her work on her website, which is www.JackieMalone.com. Jackie, thank you so much for being with us tonight. I'm so excited to get started.
Thank you so much for having me, and what a lovely welcome.
Thank you. I want to remind all of our viewers to ask questions along the way. Feel free to post those in the Q&A, and we'll share those with Jackie once we get to a time for the questions. And Jackie, I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to you and let you sort of take over and show us what you've got.
Okay, perfect. So I suppose I should start by saying that I think the exhibition, when you guys reached out to me about the exhibition that's currently on display, I and you asked me what would the modern suffragette wear. I was super inspired and I got to work immediately because it's kind of where my head has been at for all during the pandemic. So, and I think that everything that was happening 100 years ago with women is still happening. There isn't, unfortunately, a huge difference. And so I started drawing out some ideas and I put together, first of all, I think maybe I'd show you a little work that I created with your exhibition in mind. And maybe I do that first and then that would maybe get some conversation going.
That sounds great.
So I'm just going to share my screen. One second, please. All right, so it should be here. Yes. So the modern suffragette, let me just get it full screen. There we go. The modern suffragette, I've called it this little presentation, the modern suffragette still on the move, because as you described, the turn of the century, women were sort of exploring outside the home. They were riding bicycles, they were playing golf, they were agitating in the streets, as we have been doing for the last 2 years here in the US. They were their dress sense was changing to accommodate the fact that there was this new physical activity, and also on the move because there was a movement happening. There was a movement for change, and so the two women that you see here are kind of the a sort of an amalgamation of these two women that I have used to create some looks of the modern suffragette for today. And the top one this was the epitome of the modern American glamorous woman as created by an illustrator called Charles Dana Gibson, and she became known as the Gibson Girl. And she was very polished, very put together. She was very middle class. She was beginning to enter university, educated, privileged, really. And then the woman below that is called Rose Snyderman, and she was one of the first labor union activists. So she was really boots on the ground in the streets, agitating for women's rights when it came to the workplace. And there was a big fire in 1911 in a New York factory, which was called the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, and she was very instrumental in getting new labor laws put in place. So for me, I like to think of it as the Gibson Girls, a little bit like one of the Real Housewives of New York City, and then Rose Snyderman's a little bit like AOC. She's out in the street. So with that in mind, before I go into the creations, I just wanted to give you guys a little base of in the fashion industry, what fashion designs look like, what fashion illustration looks like, because illustration is really how I'm communicating here. So this is an image from one of my portfolios. This was from whenever I worked at Anthropology. This is the kind of double page you would create there. I'm showing you this to give you a sort of an idea of what fashion illustration looks like when you're on the job, and how you put your book together. So this was a portfolio that I put together to get jobs based on the work that I'd already created at Anthropology. You can see textiles, you can see the figure, you can see inspiration, etc. there. And you can see the type of fashion figure that I draw, which is called a croquis, which is basically a kind of, you have your own style of croquis to communicate your different designs. And here are two other side-by-sides. The squad, as I like to call them, on the left is kind of what I created from a portfolio based on my time in Milan. So this was a high fashion company that I worked for, and these were the designs that I created there. And then this is a much more production-based, kind of on-the-job drawing quickly here in the US. This was a freelance company that I worked for. But I don't know if you're noticing any similarities in these girls, but I'll show you one more, and then we can maybe explore that. This was another company that I worked for here in the US. Both these were, and you know, dress heavy. And what I'm trying to get at here is the croquis, the figures, the fashion figure that I drew was very, very skinny, was very, very white, and of a type, of a general type. I like to think it's a little bit like the first woman on the initial slide. It's a little bit like the Gibson girl. And I show you these just to get as a to preface the fact that this is not where my head is at anymore when it comes to illustration, nor is it what I consider a modern suffragette, the image of a modern suffragette to look like. So these, going forward, these are my ideas of what that is. Our first modern suffragette here, I'd like to talk you through a little bit what I've made her wear, what she's wearing. She inspired me. Is the girl that I'm seeing at the marches last summer. It's the girl that I see next to me paying for her 90s vintage denim jacket in Eltrian vintage. It's the girl it's students who are in my class. And she is basically on the move, as we can see. She is wearing a corset, but she's wearing her corset free and loose and not attached to any of her undergarments, because she knows she looks hot in it, and basically her boobs look great in it. So that's why she's wearing it. She's not wearing it because it's a decree from a male. Because what I also noticed is the Gibson girl was the product of the male gaze at the time. So an entire nation were responding to a man's view of what the ideal American glamorous woman should look like. So she's saying no to all that. She's rejecting that. She's wearing it as a little top. She's got it with not bloomers or petticoats of that era, but she's got it with little 70s velour kind of roller girl shorts. She has a little choker like some of the original Gibson girls wore. And then I'd like to draw your attention to the purse that she's carrying. This is the It purse for the modern activist. It was the It purse of the pandemic. It's a Telfar bag, and it is a symbol really of the sense of community that we are now building with activists and suffragettes. It's a New York-based Black designer who creates. There are wait lists for his purses. They are status symbols, yet they cost 1/20th of the price of the luxury bags that we usually see on the arms of It girls. And it is colloquially known as the Bushwick Birkin, because it is a much more democratic, accessible version of a luxury item that all the kids are carrying. So the Telfar bag is really the accessory for the suffragette of today. The next suffragette that I want to highlight is this one, and I think it's important. We're on the move again, fighting for rights, and I find it ironic when I think about it that the shirtwaist, which was the kind of the shirts that were worn by the suffragettes and the Gibson girls back at the turn of the century, were created to give women more freedom, because they could then ride bikes, horse ride, play golf, tennis, etc. And their skirts were kind of flared at the bottom to allow them some mobility. And but still 100 years later, there is a huge community that is not catered to by the fashion industry. Vogue estimates the disabled consumer market to be at $400 billion. And yet you could count on one hand the amount of companies that actually provide adaptive clothing. And they're all kind of at the more mass market level. So Tommy Hilfiger does adaptive, and ASOS and some Target. But other than that, you can't really find it. If you're looking for higher fashion or luxury fashion, it's just not addressed. This suffragette is demanding access all areas, and so that is what she is on the move for. She's wearing her own suffragette shirt, which has got the same lace trims as those from 100 years ago that you'll see in the exhibit. She's wearing the kind of the hat with the feathers that the Gibson girls wore, and she has that bouffant, that interesting bouffant hairstyle. One thing that I found interesting is many fashion forward wheelchair users have said that they are the ideal shoe consumer, yet no one ever thinks of them when it comes to footwear, because they can wear any kind of shoes, the higher the better, and never suffer for that fashion. But they are not addressed. And I think there is one company, it should be called out, called Zappos. They actually have become very known for selling single shoes or selling shoes in different sizes. But this is not something that high fashion has considered as yet. So if fashion is a form of self-expression, I think it should be available to everyone. And so she's on the move. Our third suffragette, this one is wearing something that's at that time, there was a lot of influence from Paris, as well as the likes of Charles Dana Gibson and the suffragette movement and the garments that they were wearing. America also still had a fascination with the Paris couture houses, and in particular, Paul Poiret was the lead really of that, and he was known at the time as the king of fashion. And his fashion was the opposite really of the shirtwaists and the wool skirts. It was much more ornamental, more decorated. The corset wasn't really a feature. In fact, it was almost empire line was his silhouette. Silks and chiffons and lots of highly embroidered fabrics, and you can see that here. She has that silhouette, she has the pearls, she has the little feathers in her hair, she has the pom-poms on her sneakers. But just like women 100 years ago at the turn of the century, there is this push-pull between the luxury of the decorative garment and then the need for movement and for to be athletic. And so she's wearing athleisure or striped leggings. And this pose, I chose this pose because last year I saw a lot of my students on Instagram doing a selfie pose in the bathroom where they would put one leg up on the sink. And it was because it was important to show the sneakers as well as the rest of their outfit. So I chose that pose for this. It's the rejection of the very ladylike, respectable poses that you saw Charles Dana Gibson illustrate for his glamorous ladies. And then, of course, self-expression is everywhere. What you carry, whether it's your accessory as a purse or your skateboard, messaging is very important. So you can see here, Stop Voter Suppression is the message that this suffragette wants to get out there. Then we have this little lady. So I think in society, another consumer that tends to be overlooked or tends to be unseen. Obviously, she can go into any store and buy whatever she wants, but she's not exactly seen in ad campaigns or magazines or anywhere really. She is wearing the Gibson girl exaggerated shoulder and tailored collar, and but she's playing a little bit with some of the elements of menswear, because in the early 20th century, genders were very defined, very coded. So men wore sober pinstriped plaid or checked suits. Women wore items, yes, they may be cotton or linen, but they had delicate little lace trims. She's playing a little bit with the fluidity of the genders, and she is wearing a garter belt, which echoes the corsetry of the time, but she's wearing it on the outside, and she's determined for it to be seen, because women her age really shouldn't be showing their figures, shouldn't be showing their legs, and shouldn't really be trying to be sexy according to society. So she's rejecting that, and so she's on the move too. She wants to be seen. And the last one is particularly poignant, I think. I'd drawn it before the events of this week, but the events in Atlanta I'm talking about. So this suffragette, she is actually put on the suffragette boots because she's ready to walk, and she's wearing the tailoring, the shirtwaist underneath a tiny graphic tee, and it has the large important sleeves that we know of that era that are tapered into narrow cuffs. And instead of petticoats, her undergarments have become a sort of culotte, which are more perhaps dynamic. But the trims are still in lace, and there's still little ruffles and still frills. And on her graphic tee, if you look closely, you can see the word "Stop Asian Hate." And she's making a peace sign. And so she is on the move, and she is maybe the women that we need to rally round right now at this time of our new suffrage. And so those are my let me stop share. Those are my ideas of what suffrage looks like at the moment, and based just on where my head has been for the last couple of years and what I'm seeing, and on social media, and also just on the streets and in the protest marches, etc.
I love your interpretation there, Jackie. It's so awesome to see how you've combined sort of this fashion of like 100 years ago with the fashion of today, and also the activism that's happening right now and is still very relevant. We do have a question, and it's a big one from Jeremy. It says, "Hi, Jackie. How do you think fashion has been affected by women? Poiret," and I'm sorry if I said that wrong, "Poiret was still putting women in hobble shirts, and even someone like Armani seems to prefer androgynous women. But yet we have had the suffragettes, emancipation, the feminist movement, even more today, yet it doesn't seem to have changed that much."
Yeah, that's a big one, but that's an interesting one. I think one thing that is what interested me about the exhibit and was the influence of Gibson, this illustrator, who was able to dictate what then became so influential, and women adopted his idea of the glamorous woman, and Jeremy, that has indeed extended right up until maybe a handful of years ago, because many of the big designers were male, and it's only in the last 5 years that we've started to see the very influential fashion houses in Paris and in Milan and here in New York offer the big jobs to women, so the big creative director jobs, and it's still not an awful lot of. But the fact that they are given these historic houses, that their talent is recognized, I think is important. And one of the big ones was whenever Dior hired Maria Grazia Chiuri, and her first season she put down a series of t-shirts going down the runway saying we should all be feminists, using the words of Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. So I think, everyone's aware of it, and everyone's very aware of the male gaze and how dominant it has been. And women, I think even since Me Too, are very aware of the misogyny that has crept into everything that we do and everything that we wear, and we're more alert to it. So I think in that sense, I agree with you. And I also see glimmers of things changing. I hope that answers that question. It was a big one, and I'm sure there were layers to it that I didn't remember.
And I'm sure that some of it's going to continue as we continue the conversation. So Jackie, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to spotlight your second camera so we can watch you in your process. And if you wouldn't mind just sort of telling us what's going on, what you're using, what you're diving into.
Okay, I'll get right to it. What I thought I would do a little bit, I thought I'm going to start drawing. I thought what I would create is kind of a little bit like a Vogue cover. No biggie. A Vogue cover that would take the Gibson girl from that time, because Vogue covers of the era were all illustrated, believe it or not. And but give her a modern twist. So do something unexpected. This was a time when illustration was actually at its most influential, and it was often black and white illustration as opposed to color. because color reproduction only really happened in the 1930s. And then photography happened and kind of killed illustration for a number of years. So I'm going to do a Vogue cover. And what I'm doing is a Gibson girl portrait in graphite pencil. Well, I hope that's what I'm doing. And I'm using, at the moment, I'm using a soft pencil to try and quickly capture the big swept up bouffant that she has that defies gravity a little bit. I wondered if she goes to bed with rollers in order to keep this way on her bicycle the next day. So I'm just filling in some areas quickly. And I'm trying to do a little bit like what Charles Dana Gibson did by using black and white. And he kind of left a lot of white space in his illustrations and became known for that kind of style. So I'm attempting to emulate that. Anyone who's curious, it's a 3B pencil, which is kind of a soft pencil. And then I'm going to go over it with an H pencil because that kind of makes the graininess of a softer pencil disappear a little, because too grainy, I don't really like the effect of it on. And I'm using mixed media paper, which is good for all kinds of dry materials. And I'm using graphite pencil because I like graphite pencil because it's what artists have used for centuries. And if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And
so Jackie, in the images that you showed us before, they were largely black and white with the exception of like one highlight color. Is that common in fashion illustration?
Not at all. Actually, these markers that I have here are the most common thing in fashion illustration. They're called Pantone markers, and I tend to not use a lot of them because in the fashion industry, I had to use them so much that they're my least favorite medium now. But I thought I'd use them today because there's less chance I'll spill water and watercolor all over myself as I'm talking to you guys. And you don't tend to crack open your watercolor paints in the fashion industry anyway. No one would appreciate that. So, but the reason why I did that black and white with the pop of color was really to try to emulate what was going on in the period early 20th century when color was at a premium. It wasn't common, and illustrations were black and white in usually ink or even lithogram or etching. So I was kind of trying to use modern materials, but create the same effect. So Charles Dana Gibson, there's some joy in saying his full name like that. It's very formal. But his women were very formal too. They're very aloof.
Yes.
Like very voluptuous flowers, I think. So I'm trying to keep that here. So I'm going in with the eyes. They had very expressive eyes. He didn't really put a lot of attention on noses, so I'm going to be the same. I don't want to give her zombie eyes, so I'll come back when I see what's happened there.
Eyes are always the scariest part because they have to match.
Windows of the soul, they say.
Mm-hmm.
I've always enjoyed working in pencil because it's so analog, and it's nothing has changed it over the years. When I started drawing, pencils look like this. They still look like this. I tend to use very little, I don't tend to use a lot of digital. I really kind of reject it and stay away from it as much as possible because I think it's too, I love the fact that there is a possibility I'm going to make an absolute mess. I love the idea that this could all go horribly wrong. It's my idea of living on the edge, as such as it is. Whereas with digital, I don't think you get that because you have so many brushes right there. You can delete everything you do. You can work in layers, and so you're not even going to smudge the drawing with your fingers, which I might do right now. It's just too And also, I find over the last 10 years, especially when I look at, as I work as an educator, I know that students really enjoy the digital because they like the shine and the polish of it. It makes them feel professional. But I think if you can show your manual skills as well, I think that's really appreciated by the industry. And I try to pass that on to them as much as possible.
So Jackie, do you see more and more designers and students sort of going the digital route then?
Oh yes, I do, and I think it's wrong because if you look at the world of illustration at the minute, there's so much beautiful illustration happening where people are going back to hand illustration, painting, using oil paints in fashion. Basically, everything that is turning away from the easiness um, of using a computer. So I think that it's a mistake to rely too much on the computer and let the computer do your thinking for you. But obviously, it has its part, and we can't do without it. And there are certain things where you must use computer, especially for the technical aspect of fashion. But I do think developing your hand should be encouraged also, and I try to do that with my students. And it will make your portfolio just look different than everyone else's. It'll have more of a personality, I think. So we're going to give her a little luscious little lips here, I hope. So I usually do with the lips, I start with the line that separates the lips first. I think it's the most important. And I'm using several pencils to try and give the lips some shape because I don't really want to outline the lips because I think that's less natural looking.
Jackie, I just want to let you know that 2 different people have said that they love your earrings, that they are just fabulous.
Well, that's nice. Thank you. These actually were earrings that I picked up when I was on a fashion trip. We went to Hong Kong and I found these in a market there, and I've been wearing them since, and that was long time ago. So yeah, it's one of the perks of the fashion industry was that you did do some pre-pandemic. You did some wonderful travel trips.
Hopefully again soon.
Hopefully, yes. Although I think even with regards to sustainability and in fashion, that is one of the things that companies are trying to work out now. They've basically proved that you don't quite need to travel as much as we thought we did. So I think that is a change that might happen as a result of the pandemic. So there'll be less trips to beautiful places, but the planet will thank us. So I hope you guys can see pretty well. I've got her face in. She's got this lovely ponytail down at the bottom, so I'm going to do a little bit of work on it.
So Jackie, do you tend to work sort of dark to light, top to bottom traditionally?
When I'm working with pencils like this, because if you put your hand on top of the pencils as you're working, you will smudge them and then your drawing will look a horrible shade of gray. I am working top to bottom. Usually when you finish a drawing like this, you would use a fixative so that you could, so that the pencil would stay on the page. But since student days, I've always actually does the same thing. Chemicals are chemicals, I guess. So that's why I'm working top to bottom.
And Jackie, I wanted to ask you.
I'm gonna leave. There's more to be done with the pencil, but sorry, I didn't catch that.
I wanted to ask you while you're moving into her phone there, which is going to be exciting. I wanted to ask about sort of your career path. You've had a really dynamic set of accomplishments and people and companies that you've worked with, from fashion to writing now. It's really amazing. So could you tell us a little bit about your journey and your career path and how you got here, and if there's any advice for young designers who sort of want to follow in your footsteps of fashion illustration and design.
Yeah, so I like to think that I tend to think that I wasn't really ever supposed to do fashion actually, because I have, as most people in this industry would say, I was illustrating from, I was drawing from I was really young. Um, Drawing trees, armchairs, people, chairs, going into churches and drawing the inside of churches, just anything really, but not clothes. Um, and then I wanted to go to art college, but my teachers wanted me to study English literature, and I've had an obsession with both these things forever. But I was never obsessed with fashion. It's just that I did a foundation course at art college, and fashion was the only thing I was good at. I tried fine art, I tried graphic design, I tried sculpture. I made a really hideous candlestick. Just any number of things, and I just did. I wasn't I just didn't want that fashion was the thing I was good at. And, but it had other plans. So I studied on a fashion bachelor's course. And even then couldn't accept it. For 6 months, I was walking to the fine art department and looking at what they were doing. I was walking to the sculpture department, the photography department. I think I thought that fashion was just too flaky. And I think that was what was in my head. It wasn't a serious career. And maybe to a certain extent there's something about that in me still, which is why I try to find some meaning in it. And when I'm writing about it, I try to go for things that are going to resonate rather than just, oh, somebody's launched a perfume or somebody's launched a purse. um and then I got into, as luck would have it, and I really do think it was luck, I got into what is considered the top fashion school in the world in London, which is Central St. Martin's. And I didn't get in the first time, though. I had to go on a waiting list. And so I spent a year in London just having fun and tried again and got in. Okay, I'm going to go for instant gratification here. This is the best bit, I think. I'm going to go for her fingernails. Um, and I had a hideous time at Central St. Martin's. It was just so tough, and I was just so unprepared for it. And I crawled out. I got a degree, but I crawled out on my hands and knees and was so underconfident. And I had a friend in Milan who was having the opposite experience as me. He left Central St. Martin's and he was picked up immediately and in high demand. And he was in a really good shape, and he offered, listen, you can stay in my couch for 2 weeks and see if you get a job. And I had nothing else going on, and I did. And I got a job with Moschino, and the rest, I guess, is history. But so if I can make it, anyone can make it, because it was not an auspicious beginning. Okay, we're going to give her an iPhone here. Um, So I don't know if this is clear to you yet, but my Gibson girl is basically rejecting the idea that a male should dictate how she should look. So she is taking a selfie and she knows she looks good. In the words of Lizzo, hair flick, check my nails. So she doesn't need the stamp of approval of a man such as Charles Dana Gibson. So the idea is she's taking a selfie and she's pretty pleased with how she looks, and that would be the front cover of my Modern Suffragette Vogue magazine issue.
I love that you brought that up, because we actually have a question from Kathy that sort of ties back into both your style and, you mentioned Gibson his girls being very aloof. Kathy said, New York Times has a magazine T which features fashion alongside with articles. I find it distressing that the models are all super thin and the clothing seems very confining and not designed for comfort. The facial expressions appear to be condescending. When will designers move away from these extremes and show real people?
Oh, that is a perennial question, and I think I would probably say when there's more re female representation in the higher design jobs, just really like you could answer that question with regard to so many different issues in the industry, representation. But I think those that are making the decisions, um, I don't know, I could use an example. One designer that I worked for, who was known the world over for being for dressing women in a way that made them feel beautiful. Um, he despised the back of women's knees. So I mean, um, with that, where do we go from there? If he despised the back of women's knees, then really it just gets worse from there. So so I think that I think there's I have all my faith in I teach fashion and I see the students in my classroom reject all of that nonsense. They're just not here for it. And um, there's an enormous push from my students against the traditional way of teaching fashion illustration, which I'm teaching this semester, which is you actually draw from a 9 heads figure. And by that I mean the head of the figure must fit inside the body 9 times. So there's nothing human about it to begin with. From paper, from the first moment you put anything on paper, you're drawing an alien. You're drawing nothing that looks like, if you saw a person with 9 heads walking towards you in the street, you'd run in the opposite direction. So we already start from a point where it's not realistic. But I see students now, they are not here for it. They want to know why they reject it. They want to know why we must why must they draw a figure that is so slim. So I think in that sense, the future will change because they are the future designers. And but we have a lot of designers that are quite old and that still are very, very powerful and are not changing to keep up with the changes in society. So we look to the young people and or the women, of which there are much more now pulling the strings than there were before. We look to the modern suffragettes.
And that actually leads us to another question from Tamsin. It says, hi, Jackie. Which brands and personalities or influencers do you feel are really pushing the needle and making the most progressive moves in the fashion and beauty space today? So getting back to those people who are pushing the envelope. Any that stick out in your mind?
I don't know if they're fashion specific. Well, there's a fellow Irish woman called Sinead Burke, and she's a little person who has made the fashion industry sit up and take notice of her. And she has Gucci dressing her bespoke, and she's just making a lot of noise because she is really, really interested in fashion and just doesn't understand why she's not catered to because she has the money and she has the desire to wear Gucci. So I think she's one. This is the tricky bit. Hope I do this right. There is there's an active, I don't know, you wouldn't call her an activist, Jamila Jamil on Instagram. I'm obsessed with because she's just not taking any BS and she calls it like it is. And she is a fashion forward woman, but she's not working in fashion, but she comments on it often. She's actually an actress and she has a lot to say on how the industry she works in and the fashion industry and all of these media industries affect women's views of their body, affect eating disorders. She's calling out the Kardashians regularly for their promotion of diet pills and diet drinks and nonsense like that. So, and she's someone that I thoroughly enjoy following. So I think that's two. There's probably more.
Do you know of any designers or companies that are doing a good job in bringing in diverse voices and representation in their work and in who they're hiring?
Yeah, but they're not the big names that you would be used to hearing. That's the thing. There's For example, someone like Versace has used one plus size black model and is getting such kudos for it, but it is just one girl, and she's gorgeous, and her name is Precious Lee, but it's just one girl. Other big European companies don't really use anyone other than the usual model that we're used to seeing. There was a brilliant Paris show during the last Fashion Week by Area, which was using plus size models and making them, having them wear clothes that were just celebratory and not about hiding their figure or disguising or making smaller. That was a great show to watch. Um, Other than that, there's some in London actually. Art School London is one. Um, but yeah, I would love to be able to say names that people recognize, but they're the ones that we would love that they're doing it, but they're not. The high fashion, they're not really doing it, or they're doing it in a very tokenistic way. So
Mhm.
they're definitely lagging behind. Give her hands a little more life with this brown color pencil.
I can't help but ask this one, Jackie, but Tamsin also wrote in and asked, what happened to the hideous candlestick that you made?
It's in my mom's attic. It's really hideous. I don't really know what my inspiration was, but it looked like Methuselah. It was an old wizened man in robes. I don't know where my head was at. I don't know what my inspiration was. But maybe I could go and find it now and actually fall in love with it for the quirky, unusual item that it is that no one else will have, you know?
Yeah. There's a whole trend on like a lot of social media is called like ugly art, and people are just embracing the mistakes. They're embracing the flow. They're embracing whatever comes out of it. And I think it's a really beautiful thing.
That is a beautiful thing. And when we're allowed to travel again and I get to go home to my mom's, I'm going to find Methuselah, the candlestick, and see if with my new, improved, mature um, point of view, it's actually a thing of wonder. I doubt, but Tamsin, you have inspired me.
So Jackie, we have about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to pitch you some of these other questions that are a little bit bigger questions to answer. So this one comes from Peter. It says, thank you for sharing your art. It's so beautiful. You mentioned Maria Grazia at Dior. What do you think about women leading fashion houses today? Do you see them making a change to the fashion scene?
I think that anytime a woman heads a house, it's a good thing because there's something a little off. Women are by far the biggest fashion buyers. And so there's something a little off if there aren't ever women calling the final shots. So in that respect, I think, for example, for a long time, um, Alexander McQueen, I think, is one of the most influential fashion designers of our lifetime. And when he died, Sarah Burton, his longtime assistant, took over, and there's a lot of talk about how she just doesn't have the drama and she doesn't have the theatrics of someone like Alexander McQueen, and the shows are a bit of a yawn, but yet her sales are really, really good, and I think that's a legitimate conversation because that's two different talents, two different design points of view. Hers is softer, not quite as aggressive. Both are beautiful, but there is a dissatisfaction among some that her shows are just not what Alexander McQueen had been known for. I think there's room for both, and I think that this is just two eras of the same house. So I think it can only be a good thing. More women in charge can only be a good thing. Look at how the countries that have female prime ministers and leaders dealt with the pandemic. That's all I'm saying.
So we have another question. I think that sort of speaks to what you were just mentioning. It says, in my experience with young teens and young adults, there's a trend of exclusivity and gatekeeping for people who can't afford expensive clothing and accessories. Have you noticed a trend or evolution in generic or less expensive brands to mimic what's going on in high fashion?
I I think like the bag that I mentioned in my presentation, by Telfar is often sold out, and there are wait lists for it. And I think we live in a culture where drops and wait lists are the only way for some brands to, it's a way to be relevant. And because we have such quick turnover of our attention, and because social media has become such a tool for marketing, that I think it's just the modern way. You have to create this idea of exclusivity. Um, because the public is just much more demanding and much more impatient. And it's a trickle down effect. So it starts from the big houses and the street labels like Supreme, and then the more commercial or the more affordable companies do it also because they want to be relevant, they want to appeal to the young people. Um, and it's just, I think it's par for the course. But it's an interesting observation for sure. Sign of our times, I think.
Hmm. So Jackie, we talked a lot about the suffragists and the suffragettes, both from the 1920s and from the 2020s. So I want to ask you, in your opinion, how can an average consumer do their part to make an impact on the fashion world?
Oh, see, I really like this question because I feel that all these kinds of conversations happen in the wrong places. And so I feel like they stay within little bubbles. I think that the regular consumer, because there's the idea that if you want to buy sustainable garments, there's you must be expecting to pay more. And so there's an argument also that it kind of shames people who don't have the money to buy sustainable garments. But I think there is an argument in that, and perhaps that is going on. But I think there is also some self-reflection needed. Why we think that our jeans or our t-shirts should cost less than our deli sandwich, you know? So I think my advice would be, and I wish the conversation was more global and more public and not inside design houses and design forums, that regular fashion in people who are interested in fashion think about what they buy and really question fast fashion. I'm very, very against fast fashion. I'm against, cheap t-shirts. I just think I'm too aware of what goes on in the rest of the world. I'm too aware of the shirtwaist factory incident that happened in the US. Obviously doesn't happen in the US anymore because of Rose Snyderman and those suffragettes, but it happens everywhere else, and it's because of our demand for these t-shirts and these jeans. And so as a modern suffragette, I would just say curb the enthusiasm with the fast fashion, because it's made to be disposable, but it can't be disposed of completely. It's just future landfill, and it shouldn't cost. They do say that fashion is actually the one area that has your product has actually gone down in price with inflation, whereas every other product, whether it is cars, food, um, appliances, everything else has gone up but clothes. That there's something very wrong in that, and there are too many clothes.
That's
So
so interesting. Are there any brands that you can think of off the top of your head that are doing a really good job with sustainability and with, making sure that their products aren't wasteful and aren't going directly from factories to shops to landfills?
so I think another I guess in addition to what I said before and the question that was posed before, I think that there are brands that there are definitely a lot, not so much the big brands, but there are a lot of brands that are using offcuts. They're upcycling their previous collections or unsold garments. They're um, they're recycling materials, unusual materials. I think all of that is good, but at some point it's there's not going to be enough material to recycle. So it's not an answer to everything. And some, like our skinny jeans which we all love, those are not recyclable because there's spandex in them. And so the spandex actually can't be recycled. So I would say investigate the smaller labels who are making their garments close to home. They're sourcing their cottons in the US. They're producing in the US and manufacturing and dyeing and weaving. And I know that they cost more, but I think like how our ancestors thought about clothes is how we need to start thinking about clothes again. And there are designers who are very much about the craft of clothes making, and then there are the big conglomerates who are very much about get lots and lots of product out there. And I try your best to shop shop less but shop better, I think is the slogan. And it's not everyone likes to hear it either, because it's maybe the one luxury we can all have is a little something different for the weekend, but there is a price to pay. It's just not, we're not paying it here, but someone's paying for it. And I think that in Myanmar at the minute, they are protesting in the streets. The female garment workers are in the streets, and they're working 6 days a week, 12 hours a day, and they earn less than $2 a week, and that's to produce clothes for us in the West. So there's a lot to talk about here. There's a lot of reading you can do, and it doesn't make for pleasant reading either, because it makes us feel very guilty. And we all have done it, but I guess I would just say avoid H&M.
Well, Jackie, I think that's great advice to sort of wrap up with. I do want to highlight your drawing one more time, your illustration. So if you want to tell us a little bit.
So that, I don't know, can you see it?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not exactly finished. I have a few more ideas for it, but what I think is I could complete it and then post it on social media. And you guys can share it. So it could be the final piece. Maybe I'll even put some Vogue lettering or something on it. But yes, I want to step away from it a moment and then come back and tweak it a little bit. But I mean, the general idea is that it's a sort of that we're seeing a meeting of the suffragette Gibson girl from 100 years ago that is so well represented in your exhibition, and then someone like me, who I consider myself to some extent a modern suffragette, and all of us really, and all us women at the moment, and what that looks like when you clash both those women together.
Well, I don't think that they clash at all with your illustrations, Jackie. I think they're fabulous, the way you sort of melded them together seamlessly. I think it's really wonderful. I want to really thank you so much for being here, Jackie. You're our first artist in process, and this has been such a wonderful conversation. It's been really enlightening. I know I didn't know most of this before our conversation today, so you've just filled us in on so many things that we may not have known before today. So thank you for sharing your knowledge, your experience. It's been really wonderful.
It's been a pleasure. I've just loved being involved. I wish I could go to the exhibition. I wish I could walk the rooms. It's right up my street, and I'm just really super excited that you wanted me to be involved in this way, and I've really enjoyed the chat, and I hope everyone else has too.
Well, thank you again so much, Jackie, and I want to thank all of our attendees for being here today and for posing your questions. We couldn't have such a rich conversation without your input. So again, thank you all so much for joining us and for joining in the conversation. Don't forget to check out New Century, New Woman, which is now on view at the museum. It'll be open until April 18th. And the museum is currently open Friday through Sunday, 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. So stop by anytime in there and see the exhibition in person. And don't forget to keep an eye out on our social media for Jackie's finished illustration. All right, thanks everyone so much. Have a wonderful evening.
Bye, thank you. Bye.